You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we will be talking about the sixth and final day of the World Test Championship final between India and New Zealand. Congratulations to New Zealand, they did it. They overcame the odds, I think, on the final day to wrestle the game out of the hands of the draw, take it away from India just after lunch. And then ultimately wrap it up with a fantastic little innings, a fantastic little partnership between Kane Williamson and Ross Taylor, the old boys of that New Zealand batting lineup. I'm Jack Hope. I'm joined by Ross Legg. How you doing, Ross Legg?
Marvellous, thank you, mate. What a day of Test cricket, and what a fitting final.
It was a fantastic final as it happened. Even the English weather could not ruin it. And Dan Weston, how are you doing, Dan? Good to have you back.
I'm good. Yeah, great to be back, Jack. Yeah, let's do this.
Right. First of all, I think normally we start with some messages, but Ross, I think we should get right down to the business of the cricket today. And first of all, just say a massive, big congratulations to New Zealand. Last time they were in England for a final, well, we know what happened there. It was the greatest game of cricket of all time, and England fairly won with no controversy whatsoever. Today, it wasn't as close, but it was still a great game. Do you want to eulogise a little bit about that Black Caps team?
So all of the statistics suggested that a draw was going to be it. But in the preview last night, or the daily roundup last night, I said these two teams had to go for the win. There was no point in letting it peter out for a draw. And fortunately, there was a winner come the end of play. The Kiwis came out of the blocks, and the mightily impressive Jameson removed Kohli and Pujara, and with it, probably the hopes of India's victory today. Pant was his typical bullish, glorious, frustrating, and unfortunately not good enough self in this situation, and he couldn't guide the tail to a more competitive total. India were dismissed for a relatively paltry 138. Setting a target of 138 with about 60 overs to get it in the end, and they got it in 45. New Zealand were their typically dogged, typically determined self, and even the magic of Ashwin couldn't stop Williamson and Taylor, leading them to what is an absolutely majestic World Test Championship victory for a country of that size and a budget of that size.
Dan, New Zealand, how impressed were you by them just overall in this 2-year cycle? Let's take a look at the wider picture of what it means for New Zealand to win this trophy, and then we'll get down to the business of the game.
Yeah, so I think you could say that New Zealand are a team whose sum is greater than their parts. That is not meant in any way derogatorily. That is a high praise. They have really maximised their resources. They have got everything out of these players. And, England, Australia, India, they have a lot more resources, but they kind of often contrive to make bad decisions, which kind of bring themselves down to other teams' levels. And New Zealand just nail it. They nail their strategy. They pick the right players, and they do so much well. And it's what you need to do when you don't have those resources. So fair play to them. That for them to do this, I think is just fantastic. And also, kind of, you feel like you're happy for them because after what happened in the World Cup final as well, like this is, it's a good way to draw a line under that, maybe.
Ross, anything to add to that bigger picture view, or maybe any commiserations to offer India?
Yeah, I think that this whole thing is a great advert for Test cricket, and Test cricket wouldn't be in the position if it wasn't for someone like Virat Kohli steering kind of the fans of India towards this. The India team has been fantastic, I think. They've got here. Unfortunately, they have struggled a little bit in certain areas. Like Pujara's not averaged as many runs as he could have done, etc. But if you think around the performances over the 2 years, like they're always going to have Australia. Right, it's kind of like always that. Like if there's like a relationship, where we always had that little holiday to Cornwall, and how lovely was it to look back on as our relationship falls apart in front of our eyes. But I think
You can't take away the Gabba, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. The comment of Tim Payne going, "I can't wait to get you to the Gabba," or whoever it was, will live long in the Indian folklore when it comes to cricket.
Fair enough. Let's talk about the cricket today then. So the game, the day itself, it started, and just to give you a picture, like a little snapshot of how much work New Zealand had to do. WinViz at the start of the day, so CricViz's predictor, whether you love it or loathe it, is normally somewhere in the ballpark. It had New Zealand as a 19% favourite, India with an 8% chance of winning, and the draw as a whopping 73%. But Kyle Jameson, he was having none of the narrative that this game was a foregone conclusion or that it was going to peter out. His spell to open the bowling today, Dan, it was pretty phenomenal, wasn't it? It was sort of 6 or 7 overs of, challenging ball after challenging ball, just outside off stump, challenging ball, both edges. The LBW was in play, the court behind was in play. Jameson himself, what a specimen that boy is.
I think I read somewhere on Twitter someone said that if you could build a cricketer in a factory, you pretty much come up with Kyle Jameson. And yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, what can't he do right now? Like, as someone who works for Leicestershire, and he's actually signed for Surrey. I'm glad we've played both matches against Surrey, and we're in the North group and they're in the South group for the T20s. So yeah, worked out okay for us. But yeah, fantastic player, obviously. And where did they find him from? This is. They pick players like him, Conway, just come in at the right times and really strengthen their unit just when it was required.
I think I didn't really say that much on the bigger picture New Zealand thing, but it feels to me like this match, maybe the 2 matches against England before, was the absolute pinnacle of this side's growth. We'll see BJ Watling retire now. We might see Ross Taylor go the same way. Southey's not getting any younger, neither is Bolt. But it all came together for this moment. There's so many of those 11 players are at their peak or just curving over one way or the other in terms of their peak. And I think the story of the World Test Championship from the point of view of New Zealand is how they managed to take a really strong team 2 years ago and add the final couple of pieces to make probably the greatest team in New Zealand cricket history, I'd say. And it's easy to say that just after they've won the World Test Championship final, but they've gone to number 1. They're pretty much unbeatable at home. They came to England, taught England a lesson. They beat India in this final, and I think probably maybe the only thing missing from their cap of feathers, if you like, is maybe a victory in the subcontinent against India or possibly Pakistan. I don't know how easy that will be. That's probably easier said than done, to be honest, isn't it? But they are a good side. So going back to the cricket though, Kyle Jameson this morning, he changes the game. He gets Virat Kohli out, caught behind. He gets Pujara out, also caught at slip, and that brings Ajinkya Rahane and Rishabh Pant to the crease, Ross. And it looked for a little bit, didn't it, I thought, that maybe, after that initial Jameson spell, India were going to get back on top, and salvage the game, basically.
Yeah, I think we were saying that it looked easier to bat on. That was just a bit. There was the opportunity there for them to one, rescue the game, but ultimately the quality of the bowling is what just going to talk about in this test match. Yes, the batting has obviously ended up with the runs and getting there in the end, but the bowling on both sides has been fantastic. The fact that I think they went at less than, 2.5 runs and over for the whole test match. I mean, that's pretty staggering, really, if you consider where kind of cricket's moving to, etc. I think from Rahane's point of view, he'll be absolutely gutted to have tickled one down the leg side. That is not a dismissal anybody wants, and
he always seems to be getting out in those ways, doesn't he? He's a jinx. He's got there's something. He doesn't get out in conventional ways. It feels it's always like, pulling the ball to the guy who's just there, or tickling one down the leg side. Anyway, carry on, Ross.
Yeah, relatively unlucky on that one. But I think Pant was Pant. Like this, people can sit and say they hate, and I know you're probably in the camp of Pant cost them the victory or whatever, or cost them at least the match. But that Pant is going to do that stuff, And I actually like watching a batsman like that. I like the jeopardy of it. There could well be a match-winning 80 here. He could absolutely launch one up in the air, and you just see the whole crowd like, oh, what has he done? But I love that type of player. And I think most teams should have one. It's just, I don't think you can turn around and blame Rishabh Pant for not winning them the game or not salvaging the game for them. Pujara, Kohli underperformed in the second innings. So did their opening batsman.
All right, yeah. Here's the thing I'd say about that though. Ross, you're a batter in amateur cricket. How many times have you been out in your first 15, 20 balls to a ball where you've sort of gone off and you've been like, I was beaten there. That ball was too good for me. If you're out, it happens often. If you're out in your first 15, 20 balls, half the time you probably attribute it to good bowling. How often does that happen after you faced 80?
Not that often.
Not that often, yeah. And I think that's why I'd lay a little bit more blame on Pant's shoulders for possibly not doing a little bit more to save the game. Obviously, there's some good bowling in there. Like your point about how difficult it is to get away these New Zealand bowlers is correct. And in the second innings, you saw basically all of them, all four of the big guns for New Zealand perform. Wagner obviously getting rid of Jadeja as well. But if you are going to nail 2 points at which I think the game swung either way, Pant edging and being dropped by Tim Southee on 5, Dan, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. I'm not sure you necessarily buy into to the relevance of a moment like that, but it did feel, from a New Zealand point of view, that might have been the game dropped.
Yeah, so what I think is important is to kind of with this is to. A lot of people will say, okay, well, if you got dropped at 5 and you scored 41 and that drop cost minus 36, which is just a load of rubbish, you have to look at the expected chance of catching versus the expected average from that point onwards. It's not as black and white as saying it's a 36-run difference. On the subject of Pant's innings, look, it's easy to say that's the way he plays, and I think that's kind of fair enough. You make a really valid point about, once you're in, you got to cash in. But by the same token, it still feels weird to criticise a guy who scored 41 out of 170 when loads of other people didn't get decent starts.
But that's not the nature of cricket, though. I think it's very difficult to blame someone who's got out by a good bowler in their first 15 balls of the day. I mean, look, Virat Kohli, he's not going to be going to bed tonight thinking nothing I could have done about that ball to Jameson. He is fishing at a ball 2 feet, 3 feet outside off stump. It's an ugly way to get out. Yeah. I don't think Pujara will absolutely love the way he played the ball. That
guiding it to first slip like he was a batting coach.
Well, yeah, exactly. But the point is that neither of them, were fully established at the crease, whilst Pant was. And I think so he's dropped by Southee. It looks like that's going to cost him the game. He's going well, even after Jadeja's out. There's still plenty of time. At that point in time, if he bats for 10 more overs, it probably becomes virtually impossible for New Zealand to win on that pitch against that bowling attack. And he instead of rationalising it like that, and you have to be able to think like this, I think, if you're a top level player, or it should be part of your thought process. Instead of doing that, he runs down the wicket, tries a shot that he's tried maybe 10, maybe 15 times and hit once so far. It's not something that's coming off for him. It's not like, he got out cutting the ball, smacking it to point, but his expected average on that shot is, 80. So fair enough. That is the way he plays. The way he plays is not normally to run down the wicket to every other ball and, try and hoon it back over the bowler's head, miss every single one by a foot and then keep doing it. Normally he doesn't do that, which is why to actually get out in that way, I think, is pretty inexcusable given that given the situation. Maybe the situation was too much for him. Maybe it was he was under too much pressure and he felt like he had to do something, and he wasn't able to rationalise in his head that my wicket here is worth a 30% chance of New Zealand winning the game. And that's, to go back to Wimbiz again, when Pant is batting, New Zealand had a 19% chance of winning. When he's out, they had a 54% chance. It was a 35% chance of a swing towards India. And then Ashwin's out, and it goes up to 70%. So in 4 balls, or 3 balls even, Trent Bolt's completely changed the game. And one of those wickets is frankly a total gift. And just like to finish off at this point, and because Dan, I can see you've got something that I'm sure will contribute to this. New Zealand were laughing at him while he was doing this. New Zealand, they weren't scared that he was going to whack the ball over the head of the bowler. They didn't have anyone at long off or long on for the catch. They had 2 overs before he was out. Colin de Grandhomme was fielding 3/4 of the way out at point because they thought the ball was going to go there. They'd moved him because it was a different bowler, but he hit the ball exactly where they thought he might hit the ball. It was dumb. It was dumb, and it's you know, the situation for him. I guess if you hit a 4, that's an over that New Zealand will have to bat to try and win the game. But so's batting an over. That's another over that New Zealand don't have. And I think he got the balance wrong there. Dan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, there's a few things. Yeah, I mean, if he he hadn't have got out and he got maybe 70 off 120 or something like that instead, he's taken time out of the game, but he's also increased India's chances of winning the match as well, because there's more scoreboard pressure on New Zealand. They need another 40, 50 runs in less time to do it as well. So if they want to force a result, they're going to have to bat more aggressively. But I think the main point is that you talked about the increase in New Zealand's win percentage following the wicket. Now, we live in an age where analytics, technology has never been better. Is there not anyone in the Indian setup, the think tank, who's telling Rishabh Pant or whoever's batting, look, you need to do this because of this reason. If your wicket is worth X percentage of the win percentage, so don't go play aggressively, block it out. You know, and then and this is where I think that blend of, well, there's not a blend. It's a dominance of like ex-pros running the show. They don't take into account this type of stuff, and this is where I think that analytics is actually really useful.
Just on that point as well, you might say, Ross, and I think that part of me doesn't want to castigate Pant too much because, in a sense, he has done this and we've seen it come off for him. So maybe, you know, he's probably pretty confident. He probably thought it was going to work. I think the weight of evidence suggests it wasn't, and the game situation suggests it wasn't the right time to try it as well, and maybe someone should have told him that. But if you want to look at the other option, which was to block out, Rishabh Pant has a lower dismissal rate when he plays a defensive shot than Pujara. He's sound as shit when he doesn't attack. At that point in the game, all he had to do was literally block 20 balls, and you know when did New Zealand win today? With 10 overs left, he blocks 20 balls, hits 2 boundaries in that time. Probably New Zealand are out of the match, or at least it's going to be a lot harder for them. And he gets out. We know the tail's terrible. That they weren't quite the tail wasn't quite exposed when he did that. But we know the tail's terrible, and so when he's gone, it's 20 runs later. It's all over, basically. Or New Zealand are a 90% favourite to win the match. It was it was 24 minutes from Pant being at the crease with New Zealand on a 19% chance of winning that game to the Indians all being all out and the game being over, basically.
But this is a bit for me where I don't think that this is where the World Test Championship should change. I don't think it should come down to a 1-test shootout. Like, there should be a minimum of 3 tests. Like, because as you said, you lose a couple of sessions in every test match. That's what happens. The best way to decide how good these. Imagine watching 3 test matches between these two sides. It'd be absolutely brilliant. This game has been banjaxed by rain for the majority of it, and still been one of the better test matches that has been played in the last 2 years. I think there should be an opportunity to see the 2 best teams in action over a 3-match period, maybe in different conditions. Don't know. Dan, what are you thinking there?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that maybe this was such a good match because it was a one-off match. Like if it was like a best of 3, maybe people would have shut up shop for the draw a lot more, and it wouldn't have had that kind of thrilling conclusion.
Yeah.
But we talked about. I think a few people on Twitter asked questions about whether.
Yeah, we have one from Mask 0101.
The WTC, and I think how amazing would it be, right, if you had a best of 3, and you had 1 test in like the West Indies, 1 test in England, one test in a subcontinent or Australia or something like that. Wouldn't that be so good? So a real test of conditions, best team wins, the most adaptable team wins. That would be fantastic.
Probably would take a year to resolve, wouldn't it?
Probably, but it would be fun.
Go on, Ross.
I was going to say, I just don't think anything could be taken away from this India side. They just got beaten by a slightly better side on this occasion. Like we talked about
favourable conditions as well for New Zealand.
Like how fine the margins were. And we said that New Zealand had 2 games to warm up against kind of England, and regardless if England are good or bad, that is still good, miles in the legs, experience in the middle, etc. It benefits the team. India going in a little bit half cooked, so to speak, still put up a pretty bloody good fight. I mean, Ashwin, people were saying, whether he should be in there. His match figures were like 25 overs bowled, 10 maidens, 4 for 45.
So here, on that point, that's neatly segs into something that I really wanted to talk about as well. Okay, so
as if by magic,
very much
the chemistry.
Absolutely. So I've recently prepared like analysis of Southampton, or whatever you call it, the Hampshire Bowl these days, or whatever it's called, and obviously because for county cricket. Now we actually played them on basically a green top a few weeks ago, and we didn't play a specialist spinner, and there was like no calling for a spinner whatsoever. New Zealand's team structure was completely different to India's, and I wonder whether that was another factor that's caused the kind of ultimately the result in the game. You know, New Zealand didn't play a spinner. India played 2.
Well, now, if you look at Dwaraka says, he says, you know, would Hardik Pandya for Jadeja have made sense, for example, Dan?
Yeah, and if you look at the distribution of overs in the match from spin versus pace for India, Jadeja and Ashwin bowled 22.5% of the overs in the first innings and just over 39% in the second innings. Now, this combines to 28% roughly. Now, you've got 2 spinners bowling 28% of the overs and 3 pacers bowling 72% of the overs. It's not an even distribution in workload. For me, New Zealand understood the conditions a lot more. They knew that England at this time of the year has been quite a bit of rain as well around. It's probably not a great call to play a specialist spinner, and they made the decision. The decision was completely vindicated. Whereas India picked 2 spinners, and they had good match figures, I suppose, but they didn't really take that many wickets. They didn't score many runs, and I think that they could have structured up a little bit differently. I mean, was that selection a little bit inflexible in your opinion?
I think with the players that they had available, they had to go for that. And we talked about this on the preview show for the series, actually. Their batting isn't good enough to support Mohammad Siraj at number 8 or Ishant at number 8 or something like that. And so I think to be honest, Jadeja's been so good as a batter that he was kind of had to be in the team as that number 7. We actually thought before the test, our prediction was that the battle would be won or lost in the Indian middle order. How well does Rishabh Pant do? How well does Jadeja do? How well does Ashwin do? Because we thought that the New Zealand pace bowlers would probably have a little bit too much in those conditions for the Indian top order. I think probably across both innings that turning point was correct. I mean, Jadeja probably not going to be thrilled with the number of runs he scored in this match. Not sure Ashwin batted that well. We've talked about Rishabh Pant enough. I think he could have been the difference today, but you know, well, in a sense he was, but not in the way that India would have liked. Fellas, shall we move on to one
more thing, Jack. I think on previous pods we've spoken when India have played T20 internationals and stuff. We've spoken about their team balance. I don't like at all. They really miss, and I don't think this player exists in the India pool. I will carefully point that out. That they miss a top 6 batter who can bowl. And that would have enabled them to structure up completely differently. And they miss it in red ball cricket. They miss it in T20 cricket. So they have to compromise with their bowling options or their tail. They're, like you say, you can't have a Siraj at like 8 or whatever. That just doesn't work. But what you could do, say you had a top 6 batter who bowls spin a bit. Let's look Joe Root, for example, right? You can then, in that situation, go 4 bowlers and pick the extra batter. And that does enable you to structure up quite a bit differently. So if you're a developing player in India who's a top 6 batter, learn how to bowl spin. Get in a team.
Well, I mean, I guess, look, I don't know 100% whether this would work, but in recent years, Ravi Jadeja's probably built a body of work that suggests he could bat number 6, number 5, maybe. What's the difference between Rahane and Jadeja with the bat? Probably quite big, actually, but
the difference between Vihari and Jadeja, that's the selection that's the selection difference in this, I think. And I'd much rather have Jadeja in the side than Vihari.
Sure.
Yeah. Fair.
Right, shall we move on? In fact, just before we do move on, what we will say, we didn't do this at the top of the show, we're sponsored by Woodstock Cricket. Get your cricket bats from them. They're really good cricket bats. At the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram if you want to follow us and join us for some social media hijinks. You can find us at patreon.com/the Cricket Pod. We're still on 12. We're trying to get to unlucky number 13. So help us out if you wouldn't mind. And Ross, is there something else that we normally say at this point?
No. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, like and subscribe. If you're watching along now, there's sort of 60 or 70 people watching. A little bit lower than usual. I wonder why that is. But hit that like button or hit the dislike button. I don't think YouTube differentiates between interactions. So hit the dislike button if you want to. And say hello in the chat. Give us a comment or something like that. We'll have time for some questions in a minute. Let's talk about India bowling because... we've talked about their batting innings, and we've talked about how good Jameson was, how Bolt changing the game. We talked about Southey yesterday. We didn't really talk about Wagner, but he was good, so we'll talk about him there in that sentence. But
it was good to see the bumper stuff back. I did enjoy that. He bowled 14 consecutive bounces to Jadeja. I was just I'm not sure this is allowed, and then pitched one up and got him out.
Yeah, that was good. But it wasn't actually a foregone conclusion. We're talking about it a little bit like it was. New Zealand still needed to get 139 from 45 overs on a difficult wicket against an absolutely elite bowling attack. And it wasn't easy, was it, Ross?
No, and it was never going to be. A trio of seamers of Sharma, Bumrah and Shami is a good bowling lineup. Bumrah does not look quite fit enough to be playing in this, but you couldn't leave him out. He wasn't his usual self. He was bowling a little bit slower than he usually does, and wasn't as threatening as he usually is. Shami again bowled his heart out earlier in the game, and there was overs in the legs, right? There was still overs in the legs. They bowled a hell of a lot. I think today you saw the pressure get to Tom Latham. Like there was no reason for him to come down the track and throw away his wicket, but that was a pressure wicket. And that's exactly the kind of conditions that Virat Kohli tries to get these people into. And I'm not going to sit here and credit Virat Kohli with being a genius or anything like that, but they are exactly the type of that is why they play it in the way they do. I think Conway got out playing all round a straight one from Ashwin, but Ashwin to a left-hander. I mean, he's going to get you out.
Most left-handers in history, isn't it, Ashwin? There's a couple more to his collection. Let's start. Can we talk about that spell? The opening spell was good. It was challenging. It wasn't super threatening. But Ashwin came on, and it felt for about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, that we were going to see an absolute masterclass, and he might conjure a miracle, or at least prevent New Zealand from getting away. So Ross, you've described the 2 wickets. But Taylor and Williamson, I mean, you almost said Williamson LBW. It was just drifting down the leg side, given out on the field, reviewed, not out. Probably the correct decision. He had 7 overs there where he was as close to unplayable as he was in Ahmedabad on a much flatter wicket in much harder conditions, I thought. Yeah,
and I mean, Dan, when we talk about Ashwin before, he's a bit of a freak, right? He's an off spinner who's good against right and left-handed batsmen, and has worked out how to do it. And watching him play is almost a pleasure sometimes to watch the guy bowl in the way he does bowl. Dan, would there be anything that you can kind of help a left-hander to get used to, to try not to get out? And my doorbell's just gone wrong, so I'll be back in 1 second.
Well, yeah, you've got to hope, you've got to pray, because his numbers against. I mean, I think we talked a bit before about, so England, Dominic Bess has got okay numbers against left-handers, but bad numbers against right-handers. Ashwin, no, he's got good numbers against both of them. If you look at his numbers right now in Test cricket, he's averaging 19 against left-handers and 30 against right-handers. Now, 30 against right-handers doesn't sound anything special, but for an off-spinner, it's special. Like, there's not many players who can do that. Fantastic, but, you know, I still hold back and think, do they need two spinners in these conditions? But yeah, Ashwin, yeah, fantastic.
In my head, Dan, and I know that you will sit there and be like, the data doesn't say this, but they genuinely, I think, India played their best 11 players they possibly have in Test cricket. New Zealand played their best 11 players they had.
Yeah, but the best 11 players don't always make the best 11. Best starts can come.
I completely agree with that, but that is just the logic of a final, regardless of all the analytics that sits behind it. Yeah. Selectors are going to go with the reputation. There's no one ballsy enough at the moment to pick like a Leicestershire side like you do.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this is where I think that teams have got to improve. They've got to improve their processes, because teams are picked on reputation. Players are recruited on reputation in T20 leagues and stuff, and it's not right. You're doing your win percentage chances damage by picking the wrong team. And actually, as it goes, in English conditions, and this is maybe an unpopular point of view, but I'll make it anyway. In English conditions, I'd actually pick Matt Henry over Wagner as well for New Zealand. So it's not an exclusive thing. I watched a lot of Matt Henry when he was at Kent a couple of years ago in the Championship. And I've never seen anyone bowl like that in English conditions ever before. And I know that is not an exaggeration. If you look at his numbers from the spell that he had at Kent, incredible. And I mean, they won, but I still would have made that's a call I would have made. I think he's also got more long-term potential as well than Wagner, who's like 35 now. But this is the whole point. Until teams are picked on ability, suitability for the venue, suitability for the opposition, that horses for courses thing, teams aren't going to play to their maximum potential. And you can say, okay, well, he's done this and he's done that and he's done that. Well, that's nice. Because it all counts what's happening in the future. The past is relevant.
So when it comes to the batting then, so Ross Taylor and Kay Williamson today, I mean, they survived, Jack. That was the key bit. They survived that onslaught. They batted out. I think there was a few maidens kind of in a row. There was pressure there, but all of their experience came to the front right here, didn't it?
It did, and actually, we've used sort of the WinViz to track the day's play so far, and it did yo-yo around. The draw actually came back into it big time when the run rate went up to, I think it just went over 3 and over at one point before Taylor opened up. I think, what did Taylor face? 16, 17 dot balls when he first came in. That brought the run rate up. The draw was up to 30% again. At one stage in the day. Now, I think that was probably a little bit high given the circumstances and the fact that New Zealand had 8 wickets in hand. But it did show that New Zealand were on the back foot, India were on top. And then Taylor, like, he does that thing, doesn't he? He is basically one of the worst batters in the world for the first 20 balls he faces. He can't time anything, and there's data that shows this. I'm not just making this up. I've got no vendetta against Ross Taylor. He is just bad for 20 balls. And then after 20 balls, he's like one of the best players in the world. It's a massive, massive change between sort of Ross Taylor not being in and then Ross Taylor in. And you saw that virtually in the space of 10 balls as he went 4 off Mohammed Shami cut through point. Then he hit Ashwin over the top through the onside for another 4. And I think he hit another cut. No, it was a drive off Ashwin in the space of 8 balls, I think it was, and it completely lifted the pressure that India had built. And from there, I thought the shift was kind of irreversible. I thought those two batting together was so good, and it felt like those boundaries just killed the confidence of the Indians a little bit. The ball stopped moving around so much, and they basically picked off the runs over the course of the next hour. I don't know if you want to say anything, anyone wants to say anything about Ross Taylor. I don't know if he's got much time. Not much time left. That makes it sound like he's going to die. I don't know if he's got much time left in cricket though. Dan, Ross.
I think since I followed cricket, Ross Taylor's been in the front of in that New Zealand batting lineup, and it's brilliant. I think he's still good. I think he's actually still got a year or two to go, if I'm perfectly honest. But if I'm Ross Taylor, I'm not giving up cricket. I'm playing for as long as I possibly could do at the highest level. Like, I don't know why you'd stop. Darren Stevens,
I just checked his debut, and he's actually played international cricket for 16 years, which is an amazing achievement. But
that's I was 13 when he made his debut.
With Williamson as well. We talk when we do the IPL pods and stuff. We say that if there's a chase of 160, Virat Kohli is like the best chaser of 160 ever. Well, I think Williamson's up there as well, and he's just this calm head in these who can negotiate the choppy waters of the World Chess Championship final session. You kind of feel like there's never any doubt really with this guy. He's the master of just getting teams over the line in these lower chases.
Well, on Twitter, Mazhar Arshad has said that Kane Williamson's fourth innings average is 52.78, which is the highest for any batsman who's played Test cricket this century.
That's clutch.
Yep.
As they say, I, whether you believe in that as a concept or not, that is a pretty phenomenal record he's got at the business end of cricket matches there. So they did win. The winning moment. This is kind of what I like about this New Zealand team. I think like a lot of people like about this New Zealand team. The winning moment. Ross Taylor hits it before, jogs down the wicket, admiring his shot. Doesn't really even celebrate the fact that they've just won the World Test Championship. He's too busy sort of watching the ball go for four. Like, oh, do I need to run this? After the game. Obviously, BJ Watling said goodbye. Ross Taylor told his kids to go to bed. That was quite funny. Although it's the wrong kind of time of the day. He should be telling them to wake up, I think, probably.
Did Watling break his finger? Or
I think he dislocated it. They popped it back in at one point. But he's obviously retired now. It has to be said, Virat Kohli's words after the match were classy. He gave a big congratulations to New Zealand. He basically acknowledged that the New Zealand bowling was very, very good. Dan, he agrees with you. He thinks they need to have a fast bowling all-rounder in the side, and that might have done something. He sweet-talked Kyle Jameson. Obviously, there's the RCB connection there, so he made sure he gave a shout-out to Kyle Jameson. And then he said that he absolutely loves the format of the World Test Championship. He thinks it's the heartbeat of cricket. He thinks it's going to get more exciting in the first as it goes on. And he's looking forward to playing more Test matches. So lots of good words from Virat there. Williamson sort of saying New Zealand were happy to win. Any other reflections on the match, Dan?
No, I think we're good. I mean, the thing I really quite want to focus on is just the whole structure of the World Test Championship, and whether I still think that it's a bit of a flawed concept purely because until I should say the every team plays each other, and now maybe that's a logistical difficult nightmare, but I just don't see how you can have qualifiers where every team in the group doesn't play each other. That's just weird.
So the one change I would make, I think the concept's fine. I think just the reality of how these tours are going to work and the commercial situation of the game, the fact that the IPL's got to be played, the fact that the CPL and the BBL and the 100 got to fit into calendars and stuff like that as well, means that you probably won't ever have a situation where everyone plays everyone, even if that would be ideal. I think you can get around that a little bit, and I think you can make more Test matches matter, which is, after all, the whole point of this format of having the World Test Championship, by having the top four qualify. I think it makes a lot more matches down the table more interesting. And it also means, and this is a flaw in the system at the moment, that if you get a dodgy draw where you have to go away to Australia or away to India, you're not virtually eliminated from the tournament already, because it's very difficult to recover from a situation where you have four series a year and you get 0 points from one of them because you had to go to India and India are too good at home and the conditions are too different at home, or you had to go to Australia and you're never going to win there because you're Sri Lanka and all your best bowlers are left arm spinners. Like that's the change I would make. I don't know what either of you think.
No, I think that's a really good idea. Actually, that's a really, really fair plan. But I think when we talk about teams can't play each other because of like the T20 leagues and stuff like that, obviously that's a super valid point as well. But I'm not convinced that that's going to be a problem, say in 10 or 15 years' time, because I think that there's going to be there's such a divergence of the skills that are required for Test cricket and T20 cricket. It's just going to the gap's going to get bigger and bigger in terms of the skill sets required. The teams are eventually going to have just completely two different teams for each format. So you could even have these matches going on whilst the IPL is being played, or the BBL or the CPL or whatever.
I mean, I guess you could. We had a couple of questions from Twitter, and then we'll do anything in the chat. So if you've got some questions for us and you're listening on YouTube, first of all, hit like and then leave a message in the chat, and Ross is going to write them down by hand. The one we've got here from Paul Griffiths, friend of the show. With New Zealand being so good against the great India side, should we reassess the performance of England recently, Ross?
No, England were absolutely horrendous. No, there's no way around it. They got their selection completely wrong. They didn't play Test cricket. I don't know what they were playing, but it wasn't Test cricket. And I think India fans might be disheartened by this kind of loss here, but there is a serious possibility that India beat England like 4-1. Like there is genuinely a chance of that if they get their team selection right. But we'll have to wait and see on that.
You give England one.
I think we might win one. Broad and Anderson having to come together to try and salvage something.
Yeah, no. I think I actually have India as pretty solid favourites to beat England. Yeah, I think 3-1 or something like that, 4-1 maybe. Yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise.
Well, you just see like the grittiness in the New Zealand batting lineup. England do not have that gritty. Rory Burns is a gritty batsman, but technically not that gifted. Dom Sibley likes to bat time, but actually again not that prolific with the runs. And then Joe Root can't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders all the time. Whereas Zach Crawley's a lottery, Dan Lawrence is a lottery, Ollie Pope is a lottery. It's difficult for England.
Yeah, I think England are a completely different prospect with Stokes, Butler, and Wokes in the team. And they probably will play most of the matches. I think it'll be a really good series. I'm looking forward to previewing that and talking about that. But I think it could be a draw, to be honest, 2-2. With probably one match rained off. Let's be honest. We had one from Rickon as well. This is about New Zealand. Is this the best New Zealand bowling, or no? Are the New Zealand is the New Zealand bowling attack the best in the world? And is this the best New Zealand Test team ever? Dan, 2 questions in one there from Rickon.
Well, I think it's difficult to say that they're not the best New Zealand team of all time. Bowling wise, they have 3 players now who are into their 30s. So they're all, as you said earlier, they're either all at the peak or they're just slightly over the edge of peak. They've got Southey and Bolt, right arm, left arm, and then they've got Wagner, who's kind of like that enforcer, if you like, and Jameson, who's, like I said, a prototype of a Test match bowler. So yeah, I mean, what's not to like about that? Like I said, I'd probably have Matt Henry in for a little bit different type of player to Wagner, but very, very strong bowling lineup, obviously. And I think we called it when I did the last podcast. I kind of talked about this and said New Zealand have got the best bowling attack compared to India for the conditions, and then the fact that it was damp conditions in Southampton as well. It was, that played into their hands a little bit more as well. So, a lot to like about the New Zealand bowling lineup for sure.
Cool. Ross, do we have anything from the YouTube chat?
We do. We have one from Param Gill who says, "Should Pujara be replaced with King legend Rahul?" Yeah.
That's a bit harsh on Pujara, isn't it? What's he done wrong necessarily?
Average less than 30 in the World Test Championship.
Well, yeah, time to get rid of him then. Bring in KL, bring in King Legend, get rid of Pujara. I'd say the one thing I would say, and I think if you look at how Pujara bats in England, I think he's one of those players whose skills actually don't really translate very well to these conditions. Basically, what he does is just bat for as long as possible and completely give up on scoring runs. And in England, that's right. So that does work in some places. That works in Australia because it does get easier. In England, we saw in this Test match, we saw the ball do all sorts for 80 overs, and they get a new ball and it just does all sorts for another 80 overs. There's not really a spell in the game unless you bat for so long that the other bowlers they all get injured or absolutely exhausted. You can kind of, you don't really go anywhere, and I think that's sort of Dom Sibley's problem as well. His batting time to wait for a first change bowler and a second change bowler that are probably about as good as the opening bowlers, and he also can't score off. So it's sort of, would you be better off with somebody who's actually got an interest in scoring some runs there? I sometimes think.
Pujara on that subject as well. I mean, I'd be fascinated to see how he gets on against, likes of Broad and Anderson in the summer, because when he's played county cricket in recent years, it hasn't gone particularly well. He averaged 14 for Yorkshire, in 2018 from 6 matches, and then in 2017 when he played for Notts, he averaged 28 and almost 1/3 of his runs were from 1 century in 12 innings. So that's pretty poor in county cricket, which is obviously a lower standard than Test cricket. Do I think he's got something to prove in English conditions? Yeah, absolutely.
Tejas has just written in the chat, though, KL Rahul at number 3 in Tests v England, which is a sentence that you'd probably never want to read if you were an India fan. I reckon.
Hey, if there was a sport made for the ball eater or a format made for the ball eater, Test cricket's the one.
Anything else, Ross?
No, there's been a bit of chat said, is this the time for Kohli to stand down and Sachin, like Sachin Tendulkar did, and give someone else the reins so he can concentrate on his batting? I think you'll have to prize that captaincy out of Kohli's cold, dead hands. There is no chance he is giving that up, I don't think. Any moves on that?
Why would you get rid of him? Look, I'm not being funny. India over the last 4 years have been the best team in Test cricket. They've gone to Australia. They've won in Australia twice. Like, granted, he didn't captain one of those series, but they've still done that. They're basically unbeatable at home. Almost everywhere they go in the world, with the exception probably of New Zealand and England, they overpower the home team in a way that most nations struggle to do. And then on top of that, he's their best batter, and his intensity is able to support that India team across sort of 5 days. Now, I do sometimes think if this was a T20 question, they'd just lost the T20 World Cup final, I might say yes, it's time for someone else, give it to Rohit, or give it to one of the younger players. But it isn't. I don't think having the emotional energy to drive a team forward over 5 days or over a five test series as well is hard. And if you've got that, that's quite useful as a captain. So I like Kohli as captain. I suspect strongly, and I don't know. This is just a guess. So this is not based on anything that has happened before, or and there's certainly no allegations of corruption or favouritism or anything. But I suspect strongly that the next World Test Championship final will be held in Mumbai, or somewhere in India anyway. And I think that Kohli will probably be lifting the trophy at that point. And I think there's a good chance he is lifting the trophy for India later in this year. He's probably done enough time overall as a heel in wrestling terms. In international cricket, I think he probably deserves to win one of the big trophies.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to go out. End on the positive rather than the negative of today's victory for New Zealand.
Right, cool. We'll wrap up the show. We were going to talk about England v Sri Lanka a little bit, but the score is now 98-6. Sri Lanka batting first, so I don't think there's much to talk about there. I certainly don't really want to hang around and see what happens. So we will call it a day. Just the final thing to say, obviously, once again, congratulations to New Zealand. You know, they have built a fantastic team over the last 2 years. They reached a final by, well, you know, playing some great cricket, mainly at home, but by playing some great cricket. They've come to England. They played really well against England to warm up for it. They're in conditions that are going to favour them. Then the game, it looks like, you know, their chance is going to be lost again. It looks like rain's going to effectively take away their golden opportunity to take home some silverware. And then on the last day, they turn a sort of 1 in 5 shot into a victory. In you know, by playing cricket that will live long in the memory, and there's like virtually every single player on that team contributed, not only in this match but, you know, massively to them getting here in the first place. So well done, Kane Williamson. Well done, Ross Taylor. Well done, Kyle Jameson. Well done, BJ Watling. We're sad to see you go. Hopefully we get another year of Ross Taylor. And so on and so on and so on. Anything from either of you two to round off the show?
Congratulations.
Great to have Dan back on the show.
Yeah. Cool. Final reminder, we are at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. We're sponsored by Woodstock Cricket. You can find us on Patreon if you like our show and you want to move us to unlucky number 13. Patreon.com/the Cricket Pod. It's all in the show notes, so you can just click that and go straight there. Like, subscribe, leave us a comment. We will be covering the England white ball stuff over the next few weeks, and then we'll be on to England v India starting in August. So hopefully we'll see lots of people around over the next little while. We'll have some 100 stuff in there as well. I'm not sure if you'll be allowed to join us for that, Dan, but we will be talking about the 100.
It's a good review.
Yeah, the cricket season in many ways is just getting started from the point of view of this show. So yeah, do hit subscribe, follow us, and we look forward to sharing it with you. Goodbye.
See you later.